my money, Tommy! My money!
This is a disaster. We are so screwed, man.
Look, Sonny, we were set up. The deal was an ambush.
No need to go all long range on my ass.
A clean thinker. I like that.
You're gonna find out who took our cocaine, and then I'm gonna kill them. Let me guess. You thought I could use a guardian angel.
That's a good idea. We need to start seizing territory and let Vice City know we're the new players in town. Say good night, Mr. Diaz.
Guys, we gotta make this final. We gotta leave no doubt that this is my operation. Mine!
You nutter!
Wacko.
When it comes to some of the all-time best video game sequels, there's one game that always comes quickly to mind for me, and that's Grand Theft Auto Vice City. You could say that Grand Theft Auto 3 is the most important game in the series because it was the first one to bring the franchise into a 3D perspective, and it also helped popularize the open world design that became prevalent in the industry for years to come. Some might say that San Andreas is the most important for introducing those light RPG elements, expanding the map even more and adding in more distractions and activities for the player to complete than you can poke a stick at.
You picked the wrong house, fool!
Hey!
And all of those opinions might be right, but for me, Vice City is still the best of the bunch.
Hey, baby! I wouldn't touch you with a 10-foot pole!
And while I admit it might not be the best GTA game, it's the one that resonates the most with me and the one that I have the most fondest memories of playing. When Vice City came out way back in 2002, I was in my final year of high school and every Friday afternoon I had a maths class, right? And this was just the absolute bane of my life at the time, because all of my mates had free periods and they'd leave for home early, leaving me by myself at lunch like even more of a loser. Safe to say though that when Vice City was released, I spent more time at home too.
That's illegal, sport!
Cruising around Ocean Beach and running down pedestrians than I did sitting up the back of a classroom waiting for 3 o'clock to roll over. With Vice City, there'd been a bit of a rippling effect with its popularity since GTA 3. In Australia, when GTA 3 came out, it took about a week or so before our classifications board, run by a complete bunch of wimps at the time, took it off shelves and censored it, because apparently the mechanic of being able to pick up prostitutes was somehow deemed inappropriate. But yet, driving around an entire city, mowing down civilians in a stolen vehicle or shooting them with automatic rifles was somehow okay. Anyway, my point is that censoring or trying to ban games just has the complete opposite effect. And the more you try to convince someone to not do something, the more they really want to. This meant that every kid that I knew at the time wanted to play GTA 3. And then when barely 9 months later we found out they were already working on the sequel, Vice City, well, you better believe we were pretty pumped.
We'll be ready.
Vice City eventually saw the light of day down under in October 2002. I'd just ridden home from school on my kangaroo, I'd thrown a shrimp on the barbie, then I finally sat down in my corrugated iron shed and played it for the first time.
This is no time for joking! Come on!
The rest, as they say, is history, and whatever positive emotions I felt from playing the third game just paled in comparison to playing Vice City.
Shut up, sit down, relax.
What's interesting too about this one is that it's a game set in the 1980s, 1986 to be precise, the same year I was born. And this was done at a time before that became commonplace, right? Before every film, TV show and marketing campaign just had to be set in that decade and leech off that aesthetic. So in a way, it really pioneered using that time period as a backdrop, and it was on the forefront of the whole fad without feeling annoying and obnoxious. It was endearing and unique. Vice City is a lot different geographically to Liberty City. The verticality of areas like Staunton Island and Shoreside Vale, with mansions perched on hills and winding roads, has been replaced by the relatively flat backdrop of Ocean Beach and Vice Point. I always thought it was an odd complaint, even back in the day when people brought up how much flatter Vice City was compared to the third game. I mean, it's based off Miami, Florida, right? And I'm no expert when it comes to anything American, though I do like In-N-Out Burger, and I'd also like to go in and out of Jessica Alba, but it was my understanding that Miami is a pretty flat piece of land in general.
Trying to be funny, kid?
Compared to the 3 islands in the prior game, Vice City technically has 4. The main ones are Vice City Beach, where the player starts out on the east, with the beaches, a shopping mall, and the Leaf Links golf course. And in typical GTA fashion, the other island didn't open up until you get a ways into the story. And this is the Vice City mainland on the west side, with downtown, then the airport and a military base, along with Little Havana and Little Haiti, right next to each other. Because yeah, putting two warring factions on each other's doorsteps never gonna end badly. Right off the bat though, the thing that makes Vice City stand above the third game is the story itself and the main character, Tommy Vercetti, voiced by Ray Liotta. You know, you might have heard of this guy. He's a pretty good actor from a little film called, I don't know, Field of Dreams. Nah, I'm kidding, son. The film is Goodfellas, and it's something that should be watched at least once by anyone with a central nervous system. In fact, if you haven't seen Goodfellas, stop the video right now and go watch it. If you come back here and tell me that you didn't like it, well, feel free to send me a message and I'll personally tell you just how much of a fucking idiot you are.
That's a good idea. That's a great idea.
Aside from being voiced by Chad Liotta, Tommy Vercetti is just a perfect evolution for a protagonist. You see, the thing about GTA 3 was that the character we were playing as didn't really matter all that much. This guy was just an empty vessel for us to release a bit of pent-up anger and go around a digital representation of New York City shooting up gang members and murdering people with a flamethrower. In fact, it wasn't even until San Andreas when we found out what his name was. This time though, you're playing as Mr. Vercetti, and that name's eventually going to carry a lot of weight.
Either way, I want green rolling off the presses 5 minutes after I get back. Got it?
Tommy's even got a bit of a backstory too, right? So, after doing a bit of time for the mob in Liberty City, they repay him for his loyalty by shipping him off to Vice City. The plan is that Tommy's going to lay the groundwork for the Forelli crime family by setting up a few drug deals. Then they'll all come up and collect, or is that down and collect? Anyway, it all goes pear-shaped and Tommy's deal is ambushed. He barely escapes with his life and the whole thing is set in motion.
You have my personal assurance that I'm gonna get you your money back, and the drugs, and I'm gonna mail you the dicks of those responsible.
He gets to work with an ambulance chaser lawyer named Ken Rosenberg and starts shaking a few trees to find out who's responsible. Or with his old boss, Sonny Forelli, breathing pastrami breath down his neck the whole time.
Don't be an unreliable person, Tommy, please. Do us both a favor. I'm looking forward to hearing from you.
This time though, Tommy's got a right-hand man, Lance Vance, which is a pretty big nod to Tubbs from Miami Vice. In fact, Lance is voiced by Philip Michael Thomas, who even played Tubbs on the show.
I want what you want, brother.
Oh yeah? And what's that?
Your green and my dead brother's white lady.
And Lance plays a pretty big part in the game overall. His brother is one of the guys who gets gunned down in the intro cinematic, and who's also a character we got to play as later on with Vice City Stories. Lance kind of starts off being a pretty likable guy, but he does turn into a bit of a whining bitch later on, and he constantly complains about not being given a big of enough slice of the action, despite the fact that the majority of story-related missions involve him. It shouldn't be all that much of a surprise or a shock where his allegiances ultimately fall, but still, he's a lot more interesting and fleshed out, and it's kinda nice to have an ancillary character along for the ride.
Lance, what the hell's going on?
I guess you could even call him Tommy's friend, for a short period of time anyway.
Wacko.
Vice City's also a game that wears its influences on its sleeve, but even saying that doesn't really do it justice. Its influences are a giant neon sign, strobing constantly. There's countless references to other films and TV shows, but the one that I think it takes the most from, aside from obviously Miami Vice, is Scarface, one of the best films of all time, and a documentary for what happens when you spend too much time doing blow. And it wasn't enough they had an entire radio station in the third game that played that film's soundtrack, now they've got a whole game that's kinda semi-based off it. Right, so first off in Scarface, you've got Al Pacino playing Tony Montana. In Vice City, it's Tommy Vercetti, Tony and Tommy. Tony comes to Miami from Cuba to start a new life. Tommy comes from Liberty City. Both of them quickly get caught up in a drug deal that goes wrong, both involving the Colombians, and they eventually kill their bosses and take over a cocaine empire. Tony kills Lopez, Tommy kills Diaz. Diaz's mansion even has a little room on the ground floor with the same wallpaper as Lopez's office from the film. One of the new melee weapons is a chainsaw, which looks a lot like the chainsaw used from the movie. And there's even a little hidden apartment you can find in Ocean Beach that's a direct reference to that scene too, complete with a blood-stained bathroom. The only difference is that Tommy survives his penultimate shootout. Tony, well, we all know how that went. Oh, sorry, spoilers. But it's also the supporting cast of characters, right, that makes this game so memorable.
Look, this is all very, give me what?
In the third game, a lot of the people who gave you missions were just walking stereotypes and tropes. You worked for the Mafia, for instance, and you got missions off guys named Luigi, Tony, and Salvatore.
Let's teach these would-be tough guys what it means to be a tough guy.
They'd call you nicknames like Kid or Slick, they'd tell you to forget about it, and they'd fire off every cliche mafioso line in the book.
I see nothing but good things for you, my boy.
Later on, you'd work with the Yakuza for a woman named Asuka, which is about as typical a Japanese name can get, aside from maybe being called Ren or Kenji. But yeah, guess what? Her brother's name is Kenji, and you'd work for that asshole later on too. Aside from that, you had enemy factions like the Colombian cartel and the Chinese triads.
You have been a busy boy.
In Vice City, you can still categorize some of these characters based off their ethnicity, and some of them are just generic gang leaders, but it was still a lot more varied than that. For starters, you've got Ken Rosenberg, a sleazy shyster lawyer that makes Jackie Charles look like Atticus Finch.
Now get yourself a drink and shut up.
There's Avery Carrington, a big-time property developer.
A clean thinker. I like that.
Umberto Rabina, a Cuban cafe owner. You've got Mitch Baker, a grizzled biker. And you'll even do missions for Love Fist, a bunch of booze and drug-addled Scottish rock stars that are a parody of old 80s glam rock bands. There's some pretty big voice actors this time around too, like Gary Busey, Burt Reynolds, Danny Trejo, and even goddamn Dennis Hopper.
The fishermen are in the throes of passion when the giant shark comes in.
What'd I say about the giant shark?
And if you often wonder why I enunciate the way that I say shit in my videos, well, let me educate you as to why that is. This scene in Waterworld, right here.
It does look like shit. And it feels like cold shit.
Kevin McKidd also voices Jez Torrent, the frontman for Love Fist, and that name might not sound familiar, but the voice should, because this guy went on to voice Soap in the Modern Warfare series.
We need some drugs, pal.
It all kind of carries over into the structure of these missions too. Now, this isn't about just doing 3 or 4 missions for one person, then moving on to the next. I mean, it kind of is for a point, but early on in the game, once you've found out who stole your drugs and ambushed the deal, you then plant the flag in the city and start to take over.
I run this town now. Me.
From this point on, you're then able to purchase properties, but more importantly, purchase businesses, like a printing press, a cab yard, ice cream van, strip club, and even a goddamn porno studio. Yeah, you can buy a porno studio and then go to work on promoting your latest film, with a bit of an odd cameo by a character voiced by Jenna Jameson.
Oh, yeah.
All right there.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, Jenna plays the role of a coked up, brain-dead porn star so well, you'd almost think she'd had prior experience.
Oh, yeah.
Each asset usually has a couple of missions you've got to complete, and then once that mission is done, the asset's going to generate cash every 10 or so minutes. For the Sunshine Auto Car Yard, for instance, you've got to steal a specific set of cars and deliver them to a chop shop. For the ice cream factory, you've got to sell cocaine-laced ice cream cones, avoiding the cops and not drawing in too much attention. For the pole position strip club, you've got to spend $300 on a private dance, which just involves sitting there for 15 minutes and watching a hideously low polygon woman gyrate in front of you. She looks like something off a Nintendo Switch game. For the cab company, you've got to take out your rivals, which ends with this kind of taxi Carmageddon where you're rammed by a super taxi with a leopard stripe paint job. Can't make this shit up. And for the Malibu Club, which is kind of like the real center of the whole campaign, you put together a crew and then pull off a bank heist. You have to find a safecracker, a shooter, and a driver. Yeah, heists. Kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it? It's really one of the many mechanics that this game introduces that would eventually go on to become staples for the series. Things like being able to purchase properties, being able to change your clothes, even using cabs to fast travel after a failed mission. You can still do all the side activities too, like the ambulance, the firefighter, and the vigilante missions. You can play crazy taxi and also deliver pizzas to make a little extra dough, pun intended. It includes the classics too, like unique jumps, hidden packages, and murderous rampages to all complete to hit that much coveted 100% checkmark. There's another really big way in which Vice City outdoes the third game across the board, and that's the weapons and the vehicles. In GTA 3 there was 13 weapons, right? In Vice City there's 35, and now they're broken up into different categories. New weapons include a Colt Python, but then you've got a Spaz 12 shotgun. There's 4 different SMGs, a whole heap of melee weapons, and even more chaos to be caused with an M60 and a goddamn minigun. On the PlayStation 2, they added in a much more useful lock-on system too. The lock-on system in the third game would have a tendency to kind of lock onto something you weren't even trying to shoot at, like some poor pedestrian in another suburb. On the PC, you can bypass this entirely and just free aim with all of the weapons, almost breaking the shooting because you can often use this to your advantage, and shoot at enemies before they've even seen you. It is definitely one of the weakest aspects of the game though, and one that I think has aged the worst. To be honest though, it wasn't even really that good for its time. And if you're going to really nitpick on one aspect of the gameplay, well, this would have to be it. Considering otherwise, I think the driving is still pretty solid, which is what you'll probably be spending most of the time doing anyway. Speaking of the driving, in Vice City there's about 100 vehicles compared to the 56 in the third game. And more importantly than just having more vehicles, there's the vehicles that the third game was lacking. Helicopters, planes, and even better than that, motorbikes. There's just something so fun about driving a motorbike down Ocean Beach in this game that I don't think I'd ever get sick of it. What I really loved too is how they brought back a lot of the vehicles from GTA 3, but they've made them look like an 80s version of the same car. So you'll be seeing the return of the Stinger, the Infernus, and the Cheetah, but they've all been cleverly redesigned to suit the decade. It's done so subtly and without coming across as a parody or making them seem dated or inferior. It's not like the car Homer designed, let's just put it that way. Vehicle physics has been improved a hell of a lot too. You can now shoot out the windows on a car, even shooting the driver through the front windshield if you're accurate enough. Tyres can also be shot out too, changing how cars handle dramatically. And you'll even see the cops throwing out these little mini spike strips if your wanted level is high enough. Driving cars still feels very simple, and about all you need to worry about is accelerating and braking. Heavy vehicles have the right amount of understeer and faster vehicles have just the right amount of oversteer. And I will just say too that the correct method of travel in this game is either an Infernus, the Cheetah, or the PCJ motorbike. And look, if you disagree, well, then you're dead to me.
You were sleeping.
It's also just a much more vibrant and colourful looking game than its predecessor, which kind of goes without saying, seeing as it's set on sunny beaches, instead of a dreary, rain-soaked version of New York City. Or, I don't know, is New York City actually that dreary and rain-soaked in real life?
Well, it's a bad world.
I don't know, man. The skybox in that game often looked like the lungs of an alcoholic chain smoker. Some of the best visual changes in Vice City, though, are ones that are so subtle you might not have even noticed them, but your brain did. When it rains, there's droplets of water that appear on the screen, or murder someone with a chainsaw and their blood hits the screen as well. When you're riding motorbikes and pick up a bit of speed, you'll even see Tommy's clothes rustling from the wind. The small quality of life inclusions are great too, like Vice City actually has a map screen. You can pause the game and get your bearings, which was something that was oddly missing from GTA 3. Then there's the minor gameplay improvements, like being able to jump out of a damaged, flaming car before it explodes. If a car ever lit up in flames in GTA 3, you had about 5 seconds before it exploded and killed you. And if the car was still in motion, or even worse, barrel rolling, you had no way of getting out. Well, now problem solved. With gang members, instead of them just walking down the street one at a time, now you'd see these guys actually hanging out in small groups, you know, like actual gangs. And look, we've got to talk about the soundtrack in this thing. It's just hands down one of the greatest soundtracks, I think, in any video game ever made, at least for licensed music.
Alright, you're obviously a busy man.
Vice City's only got 12 stations like the last game, but every single one of these is so unique and chock full of great songs. This game actually got me hooked on 80s music. Before I played this, I'd never heard of Hall & Oates or Spandau Ballet, but you better believe it, after this, Sonny Jim, that was all I listened to. It's just a staggeringly good lineup of artists. You've got Blondie, Lionel Richie, Electric Light Orchestra, then metal bands like Iron Maiden, Megadeth, and Motley Crue. I honestly don't think there's ever been a soundtrack of licensed music this good, like ever in any video game or even films. It's kind of hard to pick a favourite station though, because they've all got their own strengths, but I think it's kind of a toss-up between Flash FM and Fever 105. I still remember that really early trailer they brought out with Kool and the Gang's Summer Madness, and it was just iconic and set the scene for things to come. But I also love listening to Radio Espantoso and even the chat stations, VCPR and K-Chat, which just featured a series of scripted but really funny conversations. Hearing a discussion between a gun-toting evangelist and an overweight nudist with a lisp that ends in one of them getting shot is still etched into my brain. I mean, you know the writing is good when listening to a talk show in a video game was as entertaining as listening to the music was.
I am the sole judge of truth and decency. Get back, heathen, get back!
I love you all.
Evildoer, die, devil, die!
Ow!
Now look, I don't want to make this thing out to be some kind of timeless masterpiece, and I hope at this point I've at least been critical enough so it doesn't sound like I'm just completely sucking Rockstar's dick. One of the biggest problems I have with this game, and one that I still even do now, is that it doesn't include swimming. I mean, a game set around water with beaches and canals and no kind of swimming was added in. It's just weird. If you ever fall into the ocean or even a small lake, you're going to be dead within seconds. There is also some absolutely terrible missions in this thing. One of the missions for the bank heist where you've got to recruit the driver has you against him in this illegal street race. And they end up giving him one of the fastest cars in the game, but they give the player the kind of vehicle that Karen uses for a grocery shopping run. I also always lament having to replay that mission for Avery Carrington where you've got to control an RC helicopter and plant bombs inside a construction site. There's one even later with an actual RC plane, which is just even worse. A lot of people complained about the size of Vice City because it wasn't really all that much bigger than the third game. GTA 3 was apparently about 8 square kilometers in size and Vice City is around 9, whereas San Andreas would eventually end up being like 16 or something. There is definitely a sense of wasted space though in Vice City, to be sure. A large chunk of the map is just taken up by the beach on the east side of the city, most of which is pretty much just barren, empty hills of sand. On the other island, a fairly big chunk of the map is taken up by the airport and the docks, most of which don't offer up anything. Then on the north side, a large section is taken up by the Vice City Stadium, which again serves no real purpose outside of a few side missions. This might have something to do with Vice City being released so close to GTA 3, and I'm sure if they spent more time with the development, these areas might have been fleshed out a bit more. But I don't think it's an outright bad thing, and part of what I like so much about this game is it's so streamlined. There's something enjoyable about its simplicity, and it's really one of the last games in the series before they started trying to make these pseudo-RPGs with a game like San Andreas. And then include that much more realistic driving physics and gunplay in GTA 4 and 5. I know a lot of people think San Andreas was the best of the original trilogy, and look, I could do an entire video on why I disagree with that.
No, that ain't it.
But to me, that game just felt like throwing a bunch of shit at a wall and hoping it sticks.
No, that ain't it either.
Vice City, on the other hand, it still has enough mechanics that make it feel connected to its roots, but it also manages to evolve things just enough to feel different, along with tapping into that craziness you can only get with a GTA game. Which is something that I feel got thrown to the wayside in the more recent games, in lieu of Rockstar wanting to focus more on the story than the gameplay.
A clean thinker. I like that.
Anyone who tells you this game hasn't aged is either lying or delusional. Yes, this game has aged when it comes to the gameplay, but I think the part of it that hasn't is its character and charm, and that's something that never will.
Oh, yeah.
Its story and premise is the ultimate escapism, taking us back to that decade that most of us never got to experience firsthand, playing as a likeable psychopath that runs his very own drug cartel, in between listening to Flock of Seagulls and Grandmaster Flash. I mean, look, if you give me the option of having to deal with the real-world problems of a guy like Michael in GTA 5, that being a cheating wife, kids that don't respect you, and a lunatic best friend who you're never sure is going to hug you or kill you. On the other side, I've got the Chad Vercetti wearing denim jeans, a stylish shirt, running my very own strip club and printing press, and driving down the street in an Infernus. Well, the choice is simple.
Wacko.